He wasn't supposed to be home that early. Alexander Cross, the billionaire CEO whose name was etched on skyscrapers across the coast of Maine, returned only to fetch a forgotten contract. But the moment he stepped into the garden of his grand estate, he froze. There, beneath the fading light of the ocean sky, stood his daughter, Sophia. Once a brilliant ballet dancer, now bound by scars and hesitation. A small puddle blocked her path, yet her crutch trembled as if it were a mountain. And beside her, a stranger. Ethan Ward, a former firefighter with weathered hands and 2 young sons, knelt in silence. He didn't offer to carry her. He didn't speak. He simply laid his worn coat across the water, creating a path she could take on her own. Alexander had built empires, but in that quiet, fleeting act, he realized something terrifying. This man had done what he hadn't managed in years, given his daughter a reason to move forward. If you believe in stories where love grows from brokenness, where small kindness rewrites destiny, then stay with us. This is where it begins. Alexander Cross did not believe in accidents. For 3 decades, his life had been a careful orchestration of numbers, contracts, mergers, and strategies. He woke before dawn, his schedule arranged in 15-minute increments, his meals prepared by a chef who understood macros better than recipes. His empire stretched across 5 states, from gleaming high-rises in Boston to shipping lanes in Portland. Everything about him screamed control. And yet, that late afternoon, fate intruded with something as simple as a forgotten folder. He had left it in his study, an oversight unworthy of his reputation. Annoyed but unwilling to trust anyone else with the paperwork, he instructed his driver to turn the car back toward the Cross estate. The limousine slid past coastal pine trees, the Atlantic's distant roar echoing across the cliffs. The mansion soon emerged, an ivory fortress perched above the sea, its tall windows gleaming like watchful eyes. It looked magnificent. It also looked dead. Inside those walls lived silence, thick, suffocating, older than grief itself. Alexander stepped through the carved oak doors, shoes tapping against marble that carried no warmth. He intended to head straight for his office, but then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed movement through the glass panes of the back terrace. His daughter was outside, Sophia. Even now, the name felt like a wound. She had been 21 when the accident happened. His bright, radiant ballerina who once twirled across stages with the elegance of firelight. The crash had shattered more than bone. It had stolen the rhythm from her life. For months, she refused to leave her room. Therapy helped, but only at the edges. She walked now, yes, but not freely. Every step looked borrowed, as though her body had signed a reluctant contract with pain. She stood in the garden path, a pale cardigan draped over her frame, auburn hair caught in the sea breeze. Her crutch trembled in her hand. Before her stretched nothing more than a shallow puddle left by last night's rain. But to her, it might as well have been an abyss. And beside her, someone else. Alexander narrowed his eyes. A man in a faded work shirt and mud-stained boots. Broad-shouldered, weather-worn, perhaps late 30s. He carried himself with the quiet alertness of someone who had seen flames and survived them. The new groundskeeper, Ethan Ward. Alexander had approved the hire days ago after the head butler's recommendation. Ex-firefighter, widowed, raising twin boys. Clean record, reliable references. That was all Alexander required. Competence, not conversation. And yet here was this man, kneeling in the damp earth before his daughter. Alexander's breath caught, not because of impropriety, but because of the simplicity of what the man did next. Ethan shrugged off his coat, old, frayed at the edges, and laid it across the puddle. He did not reach for Sophia's hand. He did not offer to lift her. He simply created a path, then waited, silent and steady. For a long moment, Sophia did not move. Her shoulders tightened, her chin lowered as though preparing for failure. Alexander felt the old ache rise in his chest. He wanted to shout through the window, to command her back inside, to protect her from the humiliation of stumbling. But then, she moved. One crutch, one foot, then another. The soft thud of her step on that coat was louder than any applause Alexander had ever heard in boardrooms, and when she reached the other side, Sophia exhaled sharply, as if the world had shifted beneath her. Ethan remained kneeling. He did not look up, did not claim credit. He simply gathered his coat, shook off the water, and slung it across his arm as though it were nothing. But it was not nothing. Not to Alexander. He stood frozen at the window, his hand still gripping the folder he had come to collect. For years, he had measured his success by stock prices and quarterly gains. But what he had just witnessed, a broken step taken with quiet dignity, felt like the richest moment he had seen in his own house in a decade, and it was delivered not by him, but by a stranger. That evening, dinner stretched long and silent. The dining hall, once host to governors and opera singers, now seated only two, father and daughter. The table between them seemed longer than the Atlantic itself. Crystal glasses sparkled, lamb cooled untouched, and the chandelier glared down like an interrogator. Alexander carved a piece of meat with surgical precision, but found no appetite. His eyes kept drifting to Sophia, who sat at the far end, shoulders hunched, her fork idly circling the plate. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I saw you in the garden today." Her fork stopped. She looked up cautiously. "With the new groundskeeper," Alexander added. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Ethan. His name is Ethan." Alexander nodded once, slowly. "You crossed the path." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a brittle laugh, she whispered, "It's funny how you noticed that. But not that I haven't stepped beyond the gate in 6 months." The words struck like a blow. Alexander stiffened. He searched for an answer, but found none. Sophia pushed her plate aside. "I'm not angry, Father. Just tired." "Tired of what?" His voice came low, defensive. "Tired of being treated like glass." She leaned on her crutch and stood, her silhouette fragile yet defiant against the sterile light. "Ethan didn't treat me like something broken. He gave me a path. That's all." Her crutch echoed sharply against the marble as she left the hall. Each strike reverberated like a verdict. Alexander remained seated, fork still in hand, but the food before him had turned to ash. For years, he had believed silence was protection, that if he could hold the world at bay, his daughter might somehow remain safe. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if silence had been the very thing suffocating her. Later that night, Alexander retreated to his study. The storm outside pressed rain against tall windows, the sea growling far below the cliffs. He stood by the fireplace, though no fire burned. His reflection stared back from the glass. A man who commanded empires but could not bridge the distance across a dining table. And in the back of his mind, the image replayed. Ethan kneeling, Sophia stepping. It was simple. It was devastating. With a sigh, he lowered himself into the leather chair and reached for the forgotten contract that had brought him home. But the numbers blurred. For the first time in years, a thought intruded louder than business. What if the greatest investment he could make wasn't in steel or stone, but in the fragile courage of his daughter's next step? Meanwhile, across the estate, Ethan Ward settled his twin sons into the small cottage reserved for staff. The boys, Noah and Caleb, giggled beneath tangled blankets, asking for another story. He told them one about fireflies that survived a storm by staying close together, their tiny lights refusing to go out. When at last they drifted to sleep, Ethan stepped outside, the harmonica in his pocket cool against his hand. He raised it to his lips and let a quiet tune spill into the night air. The melody was rough, imperfect, but it carried warmth. From her window in the main house, Sophia heard it faintly. She leaned closer to the glass, the sound threading through the storm. She hadn't listened to live music since her mother's piano filled the halls. For a moment, just one fleeting moment, she closed her eyes and felt something stir where silence had lived for too long. The morning after the storm, the Cross estate glistened as if freshly painted by the sea. Drops clung to rose petals like scattered diamonds. The stone paths shimmered in silver threads, and the Atlantic beyond rolled slow and endless. It was the kind of beauty that should have felt alive. And yet, within the mansion, silence still ruled like a monarch. Sophia sat at her window seat, legs folded, her crutch leaning nearby. She traced her finger idly against the fog on the glass, sketching shapes, only to wipe them away again. She had barely slept. The sound of Ethan's harmonica the night before had refused to leave her mind. It hadn't been polished music. It was uneven, human, with breaths breaking the notes. But something in its imperfection reached her. It wasn't a performance, it was a presence. She turned slightly and saw movement on the lawn below. Ethan was already at work, trimming branches, boots sinking into damp soil. His sons trailed him, small whirlwinds of energy in oversized jackets. One balanced on the edge of a stone wall, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker. The other crouched near the garden bed, holding a snail with fascinated reverence. Sophia watched longer than she intended. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. But in truth, she envied them. The ease, the laughter, the way they occupied space without apology. By mid-morning she found herself in the sunroom, journal balanced on her lap. She had come here out of habit, not intent, but her pen hovered above the page longer than usual. Finally, she wrote, "He doesn't see me as broken glass. He sees me as stone, heavy, scarred, but unshattered." The scratch of the pen startled her. It had been weeks since she wrote anything that wasn't memory or complaint. She snapped the journal closed quickly, almost ashamed, when a knock sounded on the glass door. Ethan stood there, gloves in one hand, his expression careful, respectful. "Sorry to disturb you," he said when she opened it a crack. "The storm knocked down part of the trellis near the roses. I'll be fixing it. Just wanted to let you know in case the noise bothers you." Sophia blinked, unused to being asked permission for anything in her own house. "It won't," she said. Then, after a pause, "Thank you." He nodded once, then turned to go. Before she could stop herself, she added, "That song you played last night, what was it?" Ethan hesitated, glancing back. "Didn't have a name. Just something I play when the world's too quiet." Sophia's lips curved faintly. Then I heard it right. Down the hall, Alexander listened from his study. His estate had been built to carry sound, music halls, echoing staircases, rooms designed for performances. And yet, over the years, he had taught himself to hear nothing. Today, though, he caught the low rumble of unfamiliar voices, his daughter speaking, softly, to the groundskeeper. He set down his pen, irritation prickling. It wasn't that he disliked Ethan, not yet. But influence was a dangerous currency, and Sophia, in her fragility, was vulnerable. He could not allow strangers to shape her recovery in ways he could not control. Control. The word lingered bitterly. Later that afternoon, Sophia wandered further than she had in months. The garden path stretched like a challenge before her, each step a negotiation with pain and memory. But she pressed forward until she found Ethan kneeling near the trellis, hammer in hand, his sons holding nails like squires at a battlefield. "Ma'am," Ethan said when he noticed her. He stood quickly, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Don't call me that," Sophia replied, surprising even herself with the firmness of her voice. "It makes me sound like an antique." Ethan's mouth twitched. "What should I call you then?" "Sophia will do." Noah, the bolder of the twins, peered up at her with wide eyes. "Are you the lady who lives in the castle?" Sophia blinked. "Castle?" She glanced back at the mansion, its spires piercing the sky, and laughed. An actual laugh, rusty but real. "I suppose I am." Caleb held up his snail solemnly. "Do you like him?" "His name's Sir Slimy." Sophia crouched carefully, leaning on her crutch, and examined the creature as though it were crown jewels. "He looks very noble," she said. Both boys beamed. Ethan watched quietly, hands still, as if afraid any movement might break the moment. By evening, word of the encounter reached Alexander. At dinner, he tried to mask his unease. "I hear you spent time in the garden today," he said, without looking up from his plate. Sophia sliced her roasted chicken with deliberate care. "Yes, with Ethan and his boys." "The groundskeeper's children," Alexander said flatly. "They're delightful," Sophia countered. "Do you know Noah thinks this house is a castle?" Alexander's knife clinked against porcelain. "It is not a playground." Sophia's gaze lifted, cool and sharp. "Maybe that's the problem." The words hung between them like thunder. For a brief second, Alexander wanted to lash back, to remind her who built these walls, who paid for the roof above her head. But the exhaustion in her eyes stopped him. He swallowed hard and lowered his gaze. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She padded softly through the hall until she reached the long-forgotten music room. Dust coated the grand piano like a funeral veil. She touched the keys, not pressing, just resting her fingers on ivory once familiar. Behind her, a quiet sound, the faint echo of a violin. She startled, then realized it came from outside. Ethan again, playing beneath the porch light while his sons dozed nearby. The melody wove through the walls, meeting the silent piano under her hands. For the first time in years, Sophia pressed down. A single note rang out, trembling, imperfect, but alive. Ethan's violin faltered a moment, then adjusted, as if answering her. For several minutes, they played like that, unseen, unspoken, one inside, one outside, trading fragments of a song neither knew, but both understood. And upstairs, Alexander stood rigid in the corridor, listening. His chest ached with something he had almost forgotten: hope. The following morning, Ethan knocked gently at the sunroom door. He held a small paper bag, grease spots dotting the bottom. "My boys insisted you try these," he said. "Blueberry muffins. Not fancy, but homemade." Sophia hesitated, then accepted the bag. The scent hit her instantly. Warm, sweet, imperfectly baked. She hadn't tasted anything homemade since before the accident. Everything here came plated, garnished, engineered. She bit into one, and to her horror, her eyes watered. "They're wonderful," she whispered. Ethan said nothing, just gave a small nod. But the faintest smile ghosted his lips. When Alexander discovered the empty muffin bag in the kitchen later, he held it like evidence in a trial. He didn't know whether to feel anger or sorrow. His daughter had not smiled at his feasts, prepared by world-class chefs, yet she had nearly cried over a lopsided muffin baked in a cottage oven. For the first time, Alexander wondered, perhaps wealth had built her prison, not her sanctuary. That evening, Sophia sat on the porch steps, journal open, pen scratching furiously. "He doesn't speak much. He doesn't try to fix me. He simply stands where silence once lived. And somehow, that is louder than anything else." She closed the book quickly when she heard footsteps. Alexander stood at the top of the steps, hands in his pockets, the ocean wind tugging at his suit jacket. "Be careful," he said quietly. "You'll catch cold." "I'm not porcelain, Father," she replied. For a long while he didn't answer. Then, almost reluctantly, he asked, "What does he give you that I don't?" Sophia turned her gaze to the sea. "Space," she said softly. "To be broken, to be healing, to be me." Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of her words heavier than any contract. The Cross Mansion had always been a fortress, not just of stone and steel, but of silence, rules, and unspoken distance. Alexander Cross had designed it that way. Walls high enough to keep the world out, corridors long enough to stretch between him and pain. For years, it had worked. The house was safe, controlled, immaculate. But lately, there were cracks. Not in the marble or the glass, but in the air. Laughter where there had been none. Music where there had been dust. And all of it, Alexander realized bitterly, traced back to one man, Ethan Ward. It was late afternoon when Alexander found him by the tool shed. The sky burned orange, waves crashing below the cliffs like drums. Ethan was oiling a stubborn latch, sleeves rolled, his frame bent in quiet focus. "Mr. Ward," Alexander called, voice clipped. Ethan straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sir." Alexander approached slowly, each step measured, like a lawyer circling a witness. "You've been here what? 2 weeks?" 14 days, Ethan replied evenly. "In that time," Alexander continued, "you've repaired trellises, trimmed hedges, and played the violin under my daughter's window." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "I didn't realize sound carried that far." "Sound carries everywhere in this house," Alexander said coldly. "So does influence." The words landed sharp. Ethan didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "I hired you to tend the grounds," Alexander pressed. "Not to picnic in my sunroom. Not to," his voice sharpened, "inspire attachments." Ethan set the rag down, meeting his gaze. "With respect, I never intended disrespect. Your daughter chose to speak to me. I didn't seek it out." "Yet you allow it," Alexander snapped. "You allow her to lean on you, to change because of you." Ethan's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd once talked people down from burning buildings. "She doesn't lean on me. She moves because she wants to. I just don't get in the way. Alexander's eyes narrowed. And what do you expect in return? Gratitude? A promotion? A place at my table? Ethan took a slow breath. I don't want your table, Mr. Cross. I want your daughter to believe she still matters. That's it. For a moment, silence thundered louder than the waves. Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. She is vulnerable, emotionally fragile. You don't know the years I've spent protecting her. Ethan's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something sharper. So are you! The words hit like a slap. Alexander stiffened, fury rising. You don't get to psychoanalyze me in my own house. Then stop treating me like a threat for seeing your daughter as a person, Ethan replied, calm but unyielding. For a long second, both men stood in the fading light, the air between them stretched taut. Then Alexander lifted a hand toward the house. I think it's time, he said icily, to re-evaluate your employment here. Ethan nodded once. Do what you need to do. And with that, he walked past, boots crunching on gravel, not sparing a backward glance. Sophia heard the door slam. It wasn't the soft latch of servants or the careful hush of her father's routines. It was sharp, heavy, final. She froze in the library, fingers tightening around her journal. Her crutch tapped once against the rug as she moved toward the stairs. At the landing, she saw Ethan halfway down the hall. His face was taut, unreadable, but his eyes softened when they met hers. What happened? She asked. He hesitated. Your father asked me to leave. Her breath caught. Why? Because I see you, Ethan said simply. And he doesn't know what to do with that. Sophia's throat burned. She wanted to deny it, to protect her father. But the truth rang too clearly. He's trying, Ethan added gently. But trying to control someone's healing isn't the same as helping them heal. Sophia gripped her crutch, fury and sorrow warring inside her. Wait here! She stormed down the hall, each thud of her crutch like a drumbeat of defiance. Alexander had barely returned to his office when the door swung open without knocking. Grace, he began, then froze, because for the first time in years she wasn't trembling. She was blazing. You don't get to speak first this time, she said. Alexander straightened behind his desk. Sophia, this is not. No, she cut in, voice sharp as glass. You want to protect me? Then stop making me feel like a burden you're afraid to break. He blinked, stunned. I never. You pushed Mother's piano behind a curtain, she pressed, stepping forward. You shut every window. You buried this house in silence because it hurt you too much to hear me try. Her crutch thudded hard against the carpet. But Ethan, he brought the music back. Not by fixing me. Not by pitying me. Just by being here. Alexander's face darkened with guilt, but his voice cracked. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she said, softer now. But you did. He faltered, words collapsing before they left his mouth. I'm not glass, Father, she whispered, and I'm not 12 anymore. I know who I let into my life. I chose him. Alexander swallowed hard, his throat raw. And what if he walks away? Sophia's gaze softened, almost pitying. Then that's my risk, not yours. And before he could respond, she turned, leaving him with silence more deafening than any storm. Back in the corridor, Ethan waited where she'd left him. Sophia didn't speak. She simply took his hand, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, I'm not afraid of falling. I'm only afraid of never trying. Ethan closed his fingers around hers. Then know this. I'm not going anywhere. and for the first time in years, Sophia believed it. That night, Alexander sat alone in the sunroom. The picnic blanket from days earlier still lay folded on a chair. One of the twins' toy cars rested under the piano bench, forgotten. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. The plastic was chipped, cheap, but oddly warm. He looked at the piano across the room. 3 years of silence pressed against him. Slowly, hesitantly, he walked toward it. He lifted the lid. The keys stared back, dust dulling their sheen. He pressed one. A note rang out, clear, lonely, alive. Another, and another. Until the Cross Mansion, long smothered by silence, began to hum again. The sea was calm the next morning, but inside the Cross estate, Alexander's mind roared like a storm. He sat at his desk, tie loosened, papers spread before him, but the words bled together until they meant nothing. The argument from the day before haunted him. Sophia's voice, sharp and certain, declaring she wasn't glass, declaring she had chosen Ethan. He had built an empire by never losing control. Yet here he was, in his own house, feeling like an intruder in his daughter's life. That evening, he found himself drawn, almost against his will, into the music room. The grand piano loomed in the dim light, its lid half raised, dust wiped clumsily where fingers had pressed the keys the night before. He hesitated at the threshold. For 3 years, he had avoided this room. Evelyn's laughter still lingered in the walls, in the faint scent of lavender polish, in the silence that followed every memory. He sat. His fingers hovered above the ivory. He didn't know why. Maybe because Sophia had spoken of Ethan bringing music back. Maybe because he was tired of silence. Slowly, he pressed a chord. Rough, uneven. Another followed. He was rusty, but the sound filled the room, fragile yet alive. For the first time since Evelyn's funeral, he let himself remember, not just the loss, but the love. Her head thrown back in laughter as Sophia danced in scarves, the way she called the piano "Where Love Lives." His throat tightened. A single tear slipped before he could stop it. The next day, Sophia wandered into the same room and froze. Sheet music had been pulled from storage, the piano lid left open, keys faintly warm from recent touch. She reached out, brushing her fingers along the ivory, heart pounding. Her father had played. She found him later in the garden, pruning roses awkwardly, work usually left to staff. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled. She stood silently until he noticed her. "Did you play?" she asked softly. Alexander's hands stilled. He met her eyes, something raw flickering behind his controlled facade. "Yes," he admitted, for the first time in too long. Sophia's voice trembled. "Why now?" He glanced toward the sea, then back at her. "Because I realized silence wasn't protecting us. It was burying us." Her lips parted. For once, she saw not the CEO, not the fortress of control, but her father, stripped of armor. Later that week, Alexander began writing. Not contracts, not board memos. Letters. He took Evelyn's old stationery from the bottom drawer, a pale cream with gold edges, and wrote, "Dear Evelyn, our daughter smiled yesterday. Not a polite smile, not forced, real. I had forgotten what that looked like. I wish you could have seen her. Perhaps you did. Perhaps you always do." He folded the page and tucked it away, though he wasn't sure where or why. But once the words were out, he couldn't stop. Every evening, he wrote, small fragments of grief, of confession, of things he never said aloud. Meanwhile, Sophia's world widened. Ethan invited her outside more often, never with pressure, always with quiet patience. Sometimes she sat on the bench while his boys raced around the garden. Sometimes she walked further than she thought she could. One afternoon, they coaxed her into tossing a frisbee. She laughed when it soared crooked, and for a moment she forgot the weight in her legs. "You're better than Dad at throwing," Noah declared solemnly. "That's not a high bar," Ethan chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. Sophia smiled, warmth spreading in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed this chaos, the kind that wasn't tragic, but ordinary. Alexander noticed. From his study window, he often saw them, Sophia laughing with the boys, Ethan standing nearby, steady as stone. The sight cut him in two, pride at seeing life in her again, and pain that it wasn't him who gave it back. One evening, unable to help himself, he walked to the cottage at the edge of the estate. He found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, polishing his violin while the boys argued over a comic book inside. "Mr. Ward," Alexander began stiffly. Ethan looked up. "Sir." "I owe you something," Alexander said, words tasting foreign. "My daughter's laughter. It's returned. That hasn't happened here in years." Ethan set the violin down carefully. "She found it herself. I just gave her space." Alexander studied him. "Why?" "You gain nothing from this." Ethan's voice was steady. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone and think you'll never breathe again. And because sometimes helping someone else remember how to live reminds you too." The honesty disarmed Alexander. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, "She matters more than the world, but I've forgotten how to show it." Ethan's gaze softened. "Then maybe start small. Not as a CEO, as her father." That night, Sophia found a note slid under her door. "Your mother would have loved to see you smile last night. So did I. Don't stop inviting joy in, even if it doesn't wear a suit. Dad." She pressed the note to her chest, tears welling. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a prisoner in her father's house. She felt like his daughter again. The transformation wasn't instant. Old habits clung stubbornly. Alexander still caught himself checking schedules, still stiffened when Sophia mentioned Ethan's name. But cracks had formed in the armor, and through them, light seeped in. At dinner one evening, he surprised her by asking, "What's the last song you played on the piano?" Sophia blinked, fork pausing midair. "I don't remember. I stopped after the accident." "Then," Alexander said, voice gentler than she'd heard in years, "perhaps we should remember together." Her eyes widened. For the first time, hope flickered between them without fear. The weather turned quickly that afternoon. One moment, the sky over the Maine coast was pale blue. The next, dark clouds swept in from the sea, heavy and low. The air grew charged, as if the entire world was waiting. Sophia stood under the awning of the sunroom, watching the first drops splatter across the stone patio. She wore a simple linen dress, pale blue, the hem brushing against her calves. Her hair was loose, dampening at the edges from the mist. The crutch leaned beside her, but she wasn't using it. She stood on her own, arms folded, staring at the rain as if it were a challenge. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Ethan, boots already spattered with mud, flannel rolled to his elbows. In his hand he held an umbrella, though he didn't open it. "You afraid of getting wet?" he asked, his tone casual. But his eyes steady. Sophia shook her head. I'm afraid of slipping. Ethan glanced at the slick stone, then back at her. Then let's make slipping worth it. Before she could respond, he stepped off the porch into the rain. No umbrella, no hesitation. The downpour hit him immediately, flattening his hair, streaking rivulets down his face. He turned, hand outstretched, water running off his fingers. Dance with me, he said simply. Sophia laughed, startled. You're serious? I've never been more. She stared at the wet patio, the puddles glistening like mirrors. Her legs tensed with memory, the fall, the hospital, the endless therapy sessions. Every instinct screamed no. And yet, Ethan stood there, rain-soaked, patient, offering not rescue, but invitation. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she stepped forward. The first drop hit her cheek like a baptism, the next, a cascade. In seconds, she was drenched. She reached for his hand. His grip was steady, warm even against the chill. He pulled her gently into the rain. Not a waltz, not any recognizable dance, just movement. His hand on her waist, the other clasped with hers, loose and patient. At first, her steps were uneven, cautious, like testing water. But Ethan adjusted, matching her rhythm, leading without pushing, supporting without carrying. She lifted her chin, met his gaze. Rain streaked down his face, but his eyes were open, steady, unafraid. And then, slowly, she began to move. Her feet remembered what her mind had forgotten, the grace of rhythm, the freedom of surrender. The rain became percussion, her heartbeat the melody, his presence the harmony. For the first time since the accident, she felt not broken, not fragile, but alive. From the second-floor window, Alexander watched. He had come to close the shutters against the storm, but froze at the sight below. His daughter dancing barefoot in the rain with a man who did not try to lift her off her feet, but walked with her through the storm. It wasn't dramatic. It was sacred. Alexander's hand tightened on the latch. He felt something inside him fracture, jealousy, sorrow, pride, all colliding. But then, as rain streaked the glass, he lowered his hand and left the shutters open. On the patio, Sophia stumbled once. Her breath caught, panic flickering, but Ethan didn't rush to hold her up. He let her find balance herself, his hand never leaving hers. When she steadied, she laughed, a sound bright and startled, as though she hadn't heard it in years. A tear slipped down her cheek, mixing with rain. She didn't wipe it away. You're insane, she whispered, smiling. Maybe, Ethan said, but sometimes you have to get drenched to remember you're alive. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but release. She leaned closer, rain dripping from her lashes. I was scared out here, she admitted. I know, but not of falling. He raised a brow. Then what? Her voice trembled. Of being seen. Ethan brushed a strand of wet hair behind her ear. His voice was low, certain. You weren't just seen, Sophia. You were celebrated. She looked up at him, and in the quiet between heartbeats, she kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It was steady, full, unapologetic, like the storm itself. And for a moment, the world vanished. There was only rain and two souls who had known grief, finally daring to choose grace. Later, after towels and hot cocoa, after laughter faded into the hush of evening, Sophia curled beside Ethan on the couch. The twins slept in a pile of blankets nearby, faces peaceful. The house, for once, did not feel heavy. Jonathan Cross entered the room quietly, a towel draped around his shoulders, his hair damp. He had gone outside after the dance, not to confront, but to feel the rain himself. something he hadn't done in decades. He looked at his daughter, head resting on Ethan's shoulder, and saw not fragility, but freedom. For years, he had believed his job as father was to shield her. Tonight, he realized it might be to let her dance in storms. He turned, leaving them undisturbed, but in his chest, something long dormant stirred like music, returning to an empty hall. The next morning, the estate smelled of cinnamon. Sophia stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. The stove had been a stranger to her since Evelyn's death. She hadn't dared step near it. Yet now, with Lily and Caleb giggling at the breakfast nook and Ethan humming off-key upstairs, the kitchen felt alive again. Alexander entered quietly, drawn by the scent. He paused at the threshold, startled. His daughter at the stove, it was a sight he had not seen since Evelyn. "You're up early," he said. Sophia flipped a pancake without looking. "I smelled rain in my dreams. It felt like a new beginning." He stepped closer, voice softer. "I wanted to say something before the day takes it away. I was wrong." Sophia stilled, spatula in hand. "I spent so long grieving in silence, I forgot how to speak," Alexander continued. "I tried to protect you by keeping the world out, but all I did was lock you in." She turned, eyes glistening. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. "I wrote this last night, but I'll say it instead. You are stronger than I ever allowed myself to believe, and I don't want to miss another step you take." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, softly, Sophia crossed the room and embraced him. It wasn't stiff. It wasn't awkward. It was real. And Alexander, for the first time in years, let himself hold his daughter without fear of breaking her. That evening, Sophia wrote in her journal, "Today, I danced in the rain. Not to prove anything. Not to erase pain. But because I remembered I could." She set the pen down, looked at the necklace Ethan had given her, a silver pendant shaped like a piano key. She touched it lightly, smiling. For the first time in years, the house was no longer silent. It was listening. The garden of the Cross estate had never looked like this. For years, its hedges had been clipped into lifeless precision, its roses aligned like soldiers, its fountains murmuring without joy. But on that golden Saturday morning, the garden bloomed, not with order, but with life. Children's laughter floated through the air, fairy lights strung across branches like captured stars, and mason jars of wildflowers lined the stone path. Sophia stood before the mirror in the sunroom, her ivory dress simple, capped sleeves brushing against her arms, lace tracing the hem. Her hair was half up, pinned with sprigs of lavender. Around her neck rested the pendant Ethan had given her weeks ago, the silver piano key that had become her anchor. She looked at herself, not to search for flaws, not to count scars, but to recognize the woman she had become. No longer the girl frozen by fear, no longer the dancer afraid of silence. She saw strength, healing, and a heart ready to begin again. A knock at the door. "Come in," she said. Alexander entered, dressed in a slate blue suit. He held a handkerchief he was pretending not to need. For a long moment, he just looked at her. His lips parted, but his voice caught. Finally, he whispered, "You look like your mother." Sophia's throat tightened. "I feel like me." He offered his arm. She took it. And for the first time in years, they walked side by side, not as a CEO and his fragile daughter, but as father and child. The ceremony took place beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the garden. Ethan stood waiting, nerves evident in the way his fingers fiddled with the small ring box. His sons, Noah and Caleb, fidgeted in matching white shirts. Baskets of petals clutched tightly. One dropped half his load before the ceremony even began, giggling as petals scattered like confetti. Guests were few. A retired music teacher who had guided Sophia before the accident, a nurse who had helped her relearn how to stand, a neighbor who brought lemonade and stories of Evelyn from 20 years past. It wasn't grand, it wasn't gilded, but it was perfect. When Sophia appeared, arm linked with her father's, the small gathering fell silent. No one looked at her crutch, because she didn't bring it. She walked carefully, slowly, but entirely on her own. And all eyes went not to her legs, but to her face, glowing with love. Ethan's breath caught. He had never seen anything more radiant. At the front, Alexander paused, his eyes locked with Ethan's. For a moment, the weight of years, of loss, of control unspooled between them. Then Alexander spoke, voice steady but soft. "I'm not giving her away," he said. "I'm walking her toward the next beautiful thing." He placed Sophia's hand in Ethan's, then stepped aside. The vows were not rehearsed. They were born in the moment. "I don't promise to fix you," Ethan said, voice rough with emotion. "I promise to love the you who keeps choosing to grow." "I don't promise to be fearless," Sophia replied, tears shimmering. "But I promise never to face fear alone again." When they sealed it with a kiss, the garden didn't erupt with applause. It sighed, like something long held had finally been released. Noah blew bubbles. Caleb clapped off beat. And Alexander stood with his hand over his mouth, blinking back tears he no longer cared to hide. The reception was a picnic on the lawn. Plates of homemade food, children weaving fairy lights through the rose bushes, neighbors telling stories that made everyone laugh until their ribs ached. At one point, Sophia pulled Alexander aside. Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone. "I want you to walk me down the aisle," she said. He blinked, confused. "You just married him," she smiled. "I mean down the aisle of life. Not to give me away, but to keep walking beside me." His vision blurred. He drew her into his arms, whispering, "Then I'd be honored." That night, the piano room glowed with golden lamplight. The furniture had been pulled back, leaving the floor open. Sophia sat at the piano, Ethan beside her, harmonica in hand. Noah and Caleb danced barefoot on the rug, their laughter filling the rafters. Alexander stood in the doorway, tambourine in hand. He hesitated, then stepped forward, adding his clumsy rhythm to their music. His timing was off, but his smile was real. For the first time in years, the house did not echo with silence. It pulsed with life. The Cross Mansion was no longer a fortress. It had become a home. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Sophia began teaching music again, starting with Noah and Caleb, who insisted that C major sounded like squiggly sunshine. Ethan built a swing beneath the oak tree. Alexander opened the gardens to neighborhood children on weekends, their laughter ringing where silence once reigned. Every evening, Alexander still wrote letters to Evelyn. But now, they weren't about grief. They were about joy. "Dear Evelyn, our daughter danced again today. Not on a stage, not for applause, but in the kitchen while flipping pancakes." She laughed. I laughed. We are learning that love never truly leaves. It just waits for us to invite it back. He placed each letter in a wooden box alongside an old photograph of Evelyn at the piano. For the first time, The box felt less like a tomb and more like a keepsake. One sunset, Sophia sat at the piano alone. Ethan was in the garden with the boys. Alexander was trimming roses nearby. The keys glowed honey gold beneath her fingers. She opened her journal and wrote one final line. This house is no longer silent because silence was never the enemy. It was waiting. And so were we. Now we sing. Not because we forgot our pain, but because we remember and still choose joy. She closed the journal, pressed her fingers to the keys, and began to play. From the garden, Ethan lifted his harmonica. The boys clapped wildly, off-beat. Alexander hummed tunelessly, grinning, and together the house sang. Life lessons from The House That Learned to Sing. Money can't buy healing. Alexander Cross had everything: power, wealth, prestige, yet none of it could mend his daughter's broken spirit. Healing came only when he let go of control and allowed love and kindness to enter. Healing isn't about being fixed. Sophia didn't need pity or rescue. She only needed space and respect to take her own steps forward. Ethan gave her that space, and in doing so, gave her back her courage. Small acts of kindness change lives. A coat laid across a puddle, a rough tune on a harmonica, a long-delayed embrace. Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. True love is walking beside, not controlling. Alexander realized a father's role isn't to shield his child from every storm, but to walk beside her, even if it means watching her dance in the rain. Pain doesn't disappear, but we can choose to sing with it. The Cross family never forgot Evelyn. Their loss remained. But instead of silence, they chose music, memory, and joy. And that choice transformed their house from a fortress into a home. Final message for viewers. Happiness doesn't come from perfect walls or flawless protection. It comes from opening our hearts, letting others see both our scars and our strength, and choosing kindness even in brokenness. If this story touched you, let us know where you're watching from, your city, your country. It's a beautiful reminder of how far kindness can travel. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so more people can believe in second chances, quiet heroes, and the power of love. And so, the Cross Mansion was no longer just a house of silence. It became a home filled with laughter, music, and love. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest places, kindness and second chances can bring the light back in. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far kindness can travel. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories every week. Hit the like button if this story inspired you, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care of each other.